Far out in the South Pacific, where the vast blue waters stretch endlessly, lies one of the world's most remote and mysterious settlements, the Pitcairn Islands. A cluster of 4 volcanic islands, Pitcairn, Henderson, Ducie, and Owino, this British overseas territory remains one of the least populated places on Earth, home to only a handful of people. But behind its tiny population and rugged, windswept cliffs lies a fascinating history of mutiny, secrecy, survival, and an unyielding battle against time and nature. Long before European ships ventured into these distant waters, the Pitcairn Islands bore silent witness to Polynesian seafarers. Archaeological evidence suggests that Henderson, Pitcairn, and possibly Owino were once inhabited by Polynesians who arrived as early as the 11th century. These early settlers built stone structures, cultivated taro and breadfruit, and fished in the surrounding reefs. However, for reasons still unknown, perhaps resource depletion or conflicts, the islands were abandoned before European explorers set foot on them. Only their relics remained, buried beneath layers of volcanic soil and jungle. In 1767, British explorer Philip Carteret became the first European to sight Pitcairn Island, naming it after a midshipman on his ship, HMS Swallow. However, the island remained largely unvisited until an event of maritime rebellion would forever etch Pitcairn into history. In 1789, HMS Bounty, under the command of Lieutenant William Bligh, was the scene of a dramatic mutiny led by Acting Lieutenant Fletcher Christian. The ship, originally on a mission to transport breadfruit plants from Tahiti to the Caribbean, had become a floating cauldron of discontent. The crew, many of whom had enjoyed the easy life in Tahiti, resented Bligh's strict discipline and harsh leadership. After weeks of growing tension, Christian and his co-conspirators seized control of the vessel near the island of Tofua, forcing Bligh and 18 loyalists into a 23-foot open boat with minimal supplies. Against all odds, Bligh navigated this tiny boat over 3,600 miles to Timor, showcasing remarkable seamanship. Meanwhile, Christian and his men returned to Tahiti, where some stayed behind while the rest, knowing that British authorities would soon come looking for them, set sail again in search of a safe haven. With them were a group of Polynesian men and women, some of whom were taken by force, further setting the stage for future conflicts. In 1790, after an arduous search, they stumbled upon Pitcairn, an island absent from most maps and thus an ideal hideout. To prevent discovery, they burned the Bounty in what is now Bounty Bay, sealing their fate on the remote island. Initially, life on Pitcairn seemed promising. The island had fresh water, fertile soil, and a wealth of seafood. However, tensions soon erupted between the Mutineers and the Polynesians, who found themselves at a disadvantage in the power struggle. Conflicts over women, resources, and authority led to a violent chain of murders and retaliations. By 1800, only one mutineer, John Adams, remained alive, along with a handful of Polynesian women and children. Adams, realizing the need for order, turned to the Bible and began fostering a peaceful Christian society. Under his leadership, the settlement became stable, and by the time the American ship Topaz arrived in 1808, the Pitcairn community was thriving under a strict moral code. When the British learned of the mutineers' fate, Adams was granted clemency, and the unique society on Pitcairn was allowed to continue its existence in isolation. For centuries, Pitcairn remained a secluded settlement, its population fluctuating but never exceeding a few hundred. Over time, the community faced hardships: poor soil for agriculture, dwindling resources, and the sheer challenge of isolation. In 1831, a failed attempt to relocate the entire population to Tahiti ended with many returning to Pitcairn. In 1856, due to overcrowding, most residents moved to Norfolk Island. However, a few later returned, unwilling to abandon their ancestral home. Today, Pitcairn's population hovers around 50 people, making it the least populous jurisdiction in the world. The islanders, mostly descendants of the Bounty Mutineers, rely on subsistence farming, fishing, and limited trade. Internet and satellite communications connect them to the world, but supply ships arrive only a few times a year. The island operates under a British-appointed governor, but its small community makes decisions collectively. Life on Pitcairn is one of self-sufficiency and resilience. Each household grows its own crops, including bananas, papayas, sweet potatoes, and breadfruit. Fishing is a vital source of sustenance, with islanders catching tuna, wahoo, and reef fish. Bartering remains a common practice, as there are no banks or ATMs on the island. However, maintaining a functioning society in such isolation comes with difficulties. Access to medical care is limited, with only a small medical centre staffed by a visiting doctor. Serious illnesses require evacuation to New Zealand, a costly and logistically complex process. Education is available for children up to secondary level, but higher studies necessitate travel abroad, leading many young people to leave the island permanently in search of opportunities. The British government provides financial assistance, but economic sustainability remains a concern. The islanders have tried to boost tourism, mainly by selling Pitcairn's unique postage stamps and handcrafted goods to collectors and visitors. A small guest lodge welcomes adventurous travellers, but the lack of an airstrip and the infrequent arrival of supply ships make tourism development a challenge. Additionally, Pitcairn has faced controversy, most notably a criminal case in the early 2000s involving a significant portion of the male population, which cast a shadow over the island's reputation. Despite this, the remaining residents continue to work toward preserving their unique way of life and heritage. Pitcairn remains a natural wonder. The island's volcanic cliffs are home to vibrant seabird colonies, including petrels, shearwaters, and terns. These birds nest along rocky outcrops and in dense vegetation, providing a vital breeding ground for species that rely on the island's isolation for protection from predators. The surrounding waters teem with marine life, including several species of sharks, dolphins, and an abundant array of coral reef fish. The Pitcairn Islands Marine Reserve, one of the largest in the world, spans 834,000 square kilometers of protected ocean, ensuring that the region's aquatic biodiversity remains largely untouched. The pristine waters also support a healthy population of sea turtles and deep-sea creatures rarely seen elsewhere. Pitcairn's rugged terrain supports an array of plant life, from towering tree ferns to endemic species like the yellow fatu flower found nowhere else in the world. Islanders cultivate breadfruit, bananas, coconuts, and taro, which form the backbone of their diet. However, conservation remains a challenge as invasive species, such as rats and aggressive non-native plants, threaten the fragile ecosystem. Efforts to restore native vegetation and control invasive species are ongoing, ensuring Pitcairn remains a haven for its unique flora and fauna. Pitcairn faces an uncertain future, grappling with challenges that threaten its long-term survival. The most pressing issue is its declining population. Once home to over 200 residents, the island now has fewer than 50 inhabitants, most of whom are elderly. The younger generation has largely moved abroad to New Zealand, Australia, or the United Kingdom in search of education and employment opportunities, leaving an aging community struggling to sustain itself. Efforts to reverse this trend have seen limited success. The Pitcairn government has attempted to attract new residents by offering land and financial incentives, but the extreme isolation and lack of infrastructure deter most applicants. There are no major industries, few modern amenities, and access to healthcare and education remains a significant challenge. The island's reliance on supply ships, which arrive only a few times a year, further complicates daily life. Economically, Pitcairn depends on financial aid from the British government, supplemented by small-scale revenue from honey production, stamp sales, and tourism. However, tourism is limited due to the difficulty of reaching the island. There is no airport, and visitors must endure a long voyage by ship. While cruise ships occasionally stop at Pitcairn, the number of visitors remains low, making it an unreliable source of income. Environmental sustainability is another concern. The fragile ecosystem is under constant threat from invasive species, and conservation efforts are crucial to maintaining biodiversity. While the establishment of the Pitcairn Islands Marine Reserve has protected vast oceanic areas, resource management on the island itself remains a challenge. As the world modernizes, Pitcairn stands at a crossroads. Without a sustainable population and economic foundation, the island risks becoming uninhabited in the coming decades. While some islanders remain hopeful, determined to preserve their unique way of life, the reality is that Pitcairn's future is increasingly uncertain. Will it endure as a living settlement, or will it fade into history like other abandoned outposts? Only time will tell.